BC, is it true today's hearing will expose your
Do you
family?
regret the choices that brought you here?
Regret? No. Some decisions are painful. The truth has a way of waiting.
Mrs. BC, can we get a statement?
Is it true about the ring?
People often said BC Adekoya could solve any engineering problem. Whenever a construction project was in trouble, they called her. That morning, a bridge project in Ibadan had almost turned into a disaster. Workers panicked as engineers argued over what had gone wrong. Then BC arrived. The moment she stepped out of her truck, everyone relaxed. One engineer smiled with relief and said that Madam BC had arrived. After carefully examining the damaged bridge, BC calmly explained that the bridge wasn't collapsing. It was simply giving them a warning before disaster struck. Within minutes, she discovered the hidden structural defect that everyone else had missed. The workers applauded her brilliance. Her assistant jokingly told her she saved bridges the same way doctors saved lives. BC smiled, but deep inside, she knew fixing bridges was much easier than fixing her own life. Later that evening, BC returned to her parents' house. The confident engineer everyone admired seemed to disappear the moment she stepped inside. Her mother immediately criticized the clothes she was wearing and ordered her to change into something she preferred. Without saying a word, BC obeyed. Her father quietly watched the exchange, saying nothing. At dinner, her mother announced she had already arranged for BC to meet the son of an influential businessman the following day. BC tried to explain that work came first, but her mother quickly dismissed her concerns. To her, marriage mattered far more than engineering. Across the table, her father lowered his spoon. The disappointment on his face said everything words could not. The following day, BC visited her childhood friend Shade. Unlike everyone else, Shade wasn't afraid to speak the truth. She asked BC a simple question. When was the last time she made a decision without asking her mother's permission? BC laughed awkwardly and insisted her mother was only being protective. But Shade gently corrected her. There was a difference between protection and control. Those words followed BC long after she walked out of the office. For the first time, she couldn't stop thinking about them.
A few days later, BC attended a national engineering conference. Her presentation impressed everyone in the room. The applause had barely ended when suddenly the entire building went dark. The power had failed. People screamed. Paper scattered across the floor. As BC carefully tried to move, a calm male voice warned her not to take another step. Broken glass lay only inches from her feet. It was the voice of a complete stranger. His name was Kunle Daniels. Neither of them could clearly see the other in the darkness. Yet, for nearly an hour, they talked. They laughed. They shared thoughts they had never shared with anyone else. Neither realized that somewhere inside the dark hall, someone was secretly recording every single word they said. The emergency lights slowly flickered back to life, one by one. The frightened faces inside the conference hall relaxed. People laughed nervously as they gathered their belongings. Among the scattered papers, a man quietly picked up BC's presentation documents. He walked over and handed them to her. Only then did they finally see each other. BC smiled the moment she recognized his voice.
He jokingly reminded her that he was the man who had stopped her from stepping on broken glass. She laughed and replied that he was also the stranger who had made an hour in complete darkness feel surprisingly comfortable. He introduced himself as Kunle Daniels, an investigative journalist. She introduced herself as Bisi Adekoya, a civil engineer. They shook hands, completely unaware that someone hidden inside the conference hall had just taken the very first photograph of them together. After the conference ended, people slowly left the venue. Just as Bisi reached the parking lot, Kunle called after her. With a smile, he asked if the man she had spoken to in total darkness could at least buy her a cup of coffee. Bisi laughed. She accepted, but jokingly warned him that there would be no interviews. Kunle happily agreed. As they walked away together, neither of them noticed the black SUV parked across the road. Hidden behind its tinted windows, someone silently watched them through a camera lens. Another photograph was taken. The mystery had only just begun.
The rain grew heavier as they settled into a quiet coffee shop. For a while, neither of them even touched their coffee. Instead, they simply talked. Kunle admitted that Bisi wasn't the person he had imagined. He explained that she carried herself like a confident leader at work. Yet, during their conversation in the darkness, she sounded like someone who was constantly asking permission just to live her own life. Bisi looked away. His words had reached a place no one else had ever noticed. Kunle smiled gently. He reminded her that journalists looked for hidden details, just as engineers searched for hidden cracks. For the first time in years, Bisi felt completely understood. Back at the Adekoya family house, Madame Ronke quietly arranged expensive fabrics inside her bedroom. Her phone suddenly rang. The caller introduced herself to no one. She simply informed Madame Ronke that her daughter had spent nearly 2 hours with a man that afternoon. Before Madame Ronke could ask another question, the caller ended the conversation. Silence filled the room. Her expression slowly changed. Suspicion had found a new target. The conversation at the coffee shop continued. Kunle noticed Bisi checking the time repeatedly. She quietly explained that her mother expected her home before 7 every evening. Kunle looked at her with surprise. She was 34 years old. Then he gently pointed out something she had never realized about herself. He told her that she apologized even before doing anything wrong. Those simple words left Bisi speechless. She had heard many opinions about herself over the years, but never one that was so painfully true. Later that night, Kunle returned to the newsroom. His colleague Tunde immediately handed him a plain brown envelope that someone had delivered earlier. There was no sender's name. Kunle opened it carefully. Inside were photographs. Every single one had been taken that very afternoon. The conference hall, the parking lot, the coffee shop. Someone had followed both him and Bisi all day. Then a folded note slipped onto the desk. It carried only one warning. Walk away from Bisi Adekoya while you still have a choice.
Kunle slowly looked around the newsroom. For the first time, he wondered if the person watching them was much closer than he had imagined. When BC arrived home that evening, the house was unusually quiet. Madame Ronke was already waiting in the living room. Without greeting her daughter, she asked a single question. Who was Kunle Daniels? BC froze. She had never mentioned his name to anyone. Confused, she asked how her mother even knew him. Instead of answering, Madame Ronke reminded BC that nothing about her life was private as long as she remained under her family's name. The tension filled the room. Just then, her father walked in. He immediately sensed something was wrong. For the first time, the quiet man who rarely interrupted family arguments finally stepped forward, ready to defend his daughter. The following morning, BC arrived early at her office. Something immediately felt wrong. Her laptop was already switched on. She never left it that way. As she searched her desk, she realized a confidential bridge project file had disappeared. Her assistant insisted that no one had entered the office, yet the evidence suggested otherwise. Then suddenly, a message appeared on her computer screen. It read, "Some bridges collapse because of hidden cracks. Some families do too." Whew, a chill ran through BC. Someone knew far too much about her life. She slowly looked through the office window, completely unaware that across the street, someone was quietly watching her through a pair of binoculars. The following morning, Kunle couldn't stop thinking about the anonymous photographs. He spread every picture across his desk, carefully studying each one. Then, something caught his attention. A silver SUV appeared in the reflection of one photograph. He checked another picture. The same vehicle. Then another. Again, the same SUV. Kunle immediately called his colleague, Tunde. He asked him to retrieve every traffic camera recording around the conference center. Tunde reminded him that it would take hours to search through that much footage. But Kunle simply smiled. Sometimes, one small detail is all it takes to uncover a much bigger secret. Meanwhile, BC couldn't focus on work. The anonymous message on her computer refused to leave her mind. She called her childhood friend, Shade. After listening carefully, Shade rushed to the engineering office. As the two women searched the room, Shade suddenly noticed something unusual beneath a decorative flower vase. She slowly picked it up. It was a tiny listening device. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Someone hadn't just entered BC's office. Someone had been secretly listening to every conversation taking place inside it. The mystery had just become much more personal. Later that afternoon, BC found her father quietly watering flowers outside the family home. She gently asked him a question she had carried in her heart for years. Had her mother always been so controlling? For a long moment, her father said nothing. Then he admitted something that surprised her. He explained that Madame Ronke had not always been the woman she had become. There was once a time when she laughed freely, trusted people, and encouraged everyone around her. Everything, he said,
changed when BC was only 12 years old. Curious, BC asked what had happened. Just before he could answer, Madame Ronke called BC back into the house. The conversation ended immediately. As BC walked away, she noticed something she had never seen before. Her father looked afraid. Unknown to BC, Madame Ronke had already begun her own investigation. She secretly visited a private investigator. Without hesitation, she placed Kunle's photograph on the desk. She wanted every detail about him: his family, his finances, his friendships, even his past relationships. The investigator accepted the assignment. Before leaving, Madame Ronke quietly reminded him that BC must never find out. Whatever she was searching for, she intended to keep it hidden.
As evening approached, Kunle stood beside his car, preparing to leave. His phone suddenly rang. The number was unfamiliar. He answered. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, an elderly woman's voice quietly warned him to stop searching for the silver SUV if he truly cared about BC. Confused, Kunle demanded to know who she was. But the woman calmly replied that the day he discovered who owned that vehicle would be the day he wished he never had. Before he could ask another question, the call ended. Kunle immediately tried calling back. The number no longer existed. Standing alone beneath the evening sky, he realized he wasn't simply investigating a mystery anymore. He was walking straight into one. Back at the newsroom, Kunle refused to let the mystery go. His colleague, Tunde, rushed toward him with exciting news. The traffic cameras had finally captured the silver SUV. Together, they carefully watched the footage. The same vehicle appeared near the conference hall, near the coffee shop, outside BC's office, and even outside her parents' house. Kunle immediately asked Tunde to zoom in on the number plate. As the image became clearer, both men stared at the screen in disbelief. Tunde slowly turned toward Kunle. He was just about to reveal who owned the vehicle when suddenly, the entire newsroom was plunged into darkness. A loud crash echoed through the room. Someone was running. Kunle shouted into the darkness, demanding to know who was there. Moments later, the emergency lights flickered back on. Tunde lay unconscious on the floor. The tablet containing the footage had vanished. Whoever was watching BC had just proven they were willing to stop anyone getting too close to the truth.
That same night, BC made an important decision. Instead of returning to her parents' house, she chose to spend the night alone in her apartment. She carefully locked every door, checked every window, and tried to convince herself that everything would be all right. As she prepared a cup of tea, the lights flickered briefly. Then her phone vibrated. An anonymous message appeared on the screen. You should have stayed with your mother tonight. A chill ran through her body. She hurried to the balcony and looked down at the empty street. At first, there was no one. Then, beneath a lonely streetlight, she saw a dark figure standing completely still. The stranger slowly lifted one hand and waved. Before Bisi could react, the mysterious figure disappeared into the darkness. For the first time, fear replaced confusion. Someone wasn't just watching her anymore. Someone wanted her to know it.
While Bisi struggled to understand what was happening, her father carried a burden he had hidden for years. Late that night, Ade quietly opened an old wooden cupboard inside the family home. Behind stacks of photo albums, he removed a small locked metal box. Inside were memories he had tried to forget. Old newspaper clippings, a faded family photograph, a hospital bracelet, and finally, a sealed envelope. Written across it were the words, "For Bisi, when she is finally ready to know the truth." Tears filled Ade's eyes. He held the envelope tightly, then softly whispered, "Not yet. Please, not yet." Whatever secret was hidden inside, it had the power to change Bisi's life forever. The following morning, Kunle stood alone on one of Bisi's completed bridge projects. His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Tunde. His voice sounded weak, but there was something important he needed to say. Before losing consciousness the previous night, he had remembered one crucial detail. The silver SUV had not started following Bisi after they met. It had been following her long before Kunle ever entered her life. For years. Kunle slowly lowered his phone. The morning breeze swept across the bridge as he stared into the distance. This was no ordinary case of stalking. Someone had been watching Bisi's every move for a very long time. And the biggest question still remained. Why? The following morning, Kunle returned to the newsroom, determined to uncover the truth. Tunde was already there, recovering from the attack the night before. Kunle asked him to remember every detail before the blackout. After taking a deep breath, Tunde revealed that he had managed to read the SUV's registration number just moments before he lost consciousness. According to the records, the vehicle was registered to the Adekoya family. Kunle couldn't believe what he was hearing. If the SUV belonged to Bisi's family, then who had been secretly driving it all these years? The mystery had suddenly become even more personal. Later that afternoon, Bisi stopped by her parents' house without telling anyone. As she walked through the hallway, she heard voices coming from her mother's study. The door was slightly open. Curious, she quietly moved closer. Inside, Madame Ronke was speaking with a private investigator. She instructed him to investigate every part of Kunle's life. His family, his friends, his past, everything. Bisi stood frozen outside the door. She couldn't believe her mother had secretly been investigating the man she cared about. Without making a sound, she quietly walked away. For the first time, she wondered whether trust had ever truly existed inside her family. Meanwhile, Kunle followed a mysterious address written on an old note. It led him far beyond the busy city, to a quiet village surrounded by mango trees. Waiting outside a modest bungalow was an elderly woman named Mama Simi.
Before Kunle could introduce himself, she smiled warmly and welcomed him. She already knew exactly who he was. She explained that she had been expecting him. Then she invited him inside, promising that the answers he had been searching for were finally within reach. Inside the peaceful living room, Mama Simi opened an old wooden memory box. It contained faded newspaper clippings, hospital records, and several worn photographs. She handed one picture to Kunle. It showed a little girl. That little girl was busy. Standing beside her was a smiling woman Kunle had never seen before. When he asked if the woman was Madame Ronke, Mama Simi quietly shook her head. She explained that another woman had been part of Bisi's life long before Madame Ronke became her mother. Kunle slowly realized the truth was far bigger than he had imagined. Back at the Adekoya family house, Ade sat alone with a sealed envelope resting beside him. Years of silence weighed heavily on his heart. When Bisi walked into the room, she immediately sensed something was wrong. She gently asked her father what was troubling him. After a long pause, Ade admitted that he had hidden the truth for far too long. Just as he prepared to speak, Madame Ronke entered the room. The moment she saw the envelope, fear spread across her face. She begged Ade not to open it. But this time, he refused. He calmly told her that the truth had waited long enough. For the first time in many years, no one could stop what was about to happen. That evening, Kunle urgently asked Bisi to meet him. They chose a quiet roadside restaurant where no one would recognize them. Without saying much, Kunle placed an old photograph on the table. Bisi smiled as she recognized herself as a little girl. But her smile slowly disappeared. The woman standing beside her was unfamiliar. Confused, she asked Kunle who the woman was. Kunle remained silent. Sometimes, silence reveals more than words ever could. Fear slowly filled Bisi's eyes as questions she had never considered began flooding her mind. Later that night, Madame Ronke locked herself inside her bedroom. She opened an old wardrobe and carefully removed another faded photograph. It was the same woman from the picture Kunle had shown Bisi. Tears rolled down her face as she whispered a painful promise she had carried for years. She had vowed to protect Bisi, even if doing so meant being misunderstood forever. Before she could gather her thoughts, a gentle knock echoed on the bedroom door. It was Bisi. She quietly asked her mother to open the door because she needed answers. Madame Ronke closed her eyes. Deep inside, she knew the past could no longer remain hidden. A short while later, the entire family gathered in the living room. Kunle stood beside Bisi. Tope had hurried home after receiving an urgent phone call. No one spoke. The silence was almost unbearable. Finally, Ade placed the sealed envelope on the table. With trembling hands, he slowly opened it. Inside was a birth certificate. Everyone leaned closer. Bisi carefully picked it up. As her eyes moved across the document, her face slowly lost its color. The woman listed as her biological mother was not Madame Ronke. The room fell silent. In that moment, everything Bisi believed about her life began to fall apart. The room became completely silent. Bisi stared at the birth certificate in disbelief. Her hands trembled as tears slowly rolled down her cheeks. She looked first at her mother, then at her father. With a trembling voice, she asked if what she was seeing was truly real. Ade quietly admitted that every word on the document was true. Confused and heartbroken, Bisi asked the question that had suddenly changed her entire life. Then, who am I? Madame Ronke slowly stepped forward. Fighting back tears, she gently told Bisi that although they did not share the same blood, she had loved her through every prayer, every sacrifice, and every sleepless night. Those words filled the room with overwhelming emotion. As everyone remained silent, Madame Ronke finally gathered the courage to explain the truth she had hidden for nearly 3 decades. She spoke about a devastating flood that destroyed an entire community. During that difficult time, her closest friend Morayo had lost everything. Soon afterward, Morayo gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. That little girl was Bisi. But Morayo's health continued to worsen. Knowing she had little time left, she placed her newborn daughter into Ronke's arms and begged her to raise the child as her own. 3 days later, Morayo passed away. As the story unfolded, Bisi could no longer hold back her tears. Bisi could almost picture the heartbreaking memories her mother described. The flood had left homes destroyed and families separated. Among the survivors, young Ronke rushed to the hospital where Morayo lay weakly holding her newborn baby. With fading strength, Morayo gently placed the child into Ronke's waiting arms. Her only request was simple. She asked Ronke to promise that Bisi would never feel abandoned. With tears in her eyes, Ronke made that promise. Moments later, Morayo quietly closed her eyes forever. From that day onward, Ronke dedicated her life to keeping that promise. Back in the present, Bisi slowly walked toward Madame Ronke. She wanted desperately to understand. If everything her mother had said was true, why had she hidden it for so many years? Ronke confessed that fear had guided every decision she made. She had worried that Bisi would spend her entire life searching for someone who could never return. As painful as the truth was, another mystery still remained. Who had been secretly following Bisi all these years? Every eye in the room slowly turned toward Kunle. Perhaps he was finally about to provide the answer. Meanwhile, Kunle continued connecting every clue. The surveillance photographs, the hospital records, the anonymous phone calls. One familiar face appeared over and over again.
a middle-aged man wearing a brown cap. Always nearby. Always watching. Just as Kunle enlarged the image, his phone rang. It was Mama Simi. Her voice sounded unusually urgent. She warned Kunle to leave the newsroom immediately because he was no longer safe. Before he could ask another question, the call suddenly ended. Whatever was happening, time was quickly running out.
Kunle cautiously walked into the nearly empty parking lot. His eyes immediately noticed the silver SUV waiting nearby. Without warning, its headlights switched on. The engine started. The vehicle slowly rolled toward him before stopping only a few steps away. A man quietly stepped out. As he removed his cap, Kunle recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Falade, the quiet security supervisor from BC's engineering company. Kunle could hardly believe his eyes. When he demanded an explanation, Mr. Falade calmly replied that he had been expecting this conversation for a very long time. Mr. Falade led Kunle to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. Kunle remained alert, unsure whether to trust him. Inside, Mr. Falade calmly explained that he had never intended to frighten BC. His only responsibility had been protecting her. He opened an old briefcase. Instead of finding weapons, Kunle discovered hundreds of photographs. Birthdays, school ceremonies, graduation. Every important milestone in BC's life had been carefully documented. It became clear that someone had quietly watched over her for decades. Not out of hatred, but out of loyalty. Still struggling to understand, Kunle asked the question that mattered most. Who had hired Mr. Falade? After a long pause, Mr. Falade quietly answered, Morayo. Before she passed away, she feared powerful people might one day target BC because of valuable family property connected to her late husband. She trusted Mr. Falade to watch over her daughter from a distance. For nearly 30 years, he had faithfully kept that promise. At last, the mystery of the silent guardian finally made sense. Not long afterward, BC received an urgent call from Kunle. He finally knew the identity of the mysterious man who had been following her. He asked her to come immediately. As BC prepared to leave, she looked toward her parents. This time, Madame Ronke did not stop her. Instead, she gently encouraged her to go and discover the complete truth. Standing beside his wife, Ade quietly held her hand. After years of carrying painful secrets, they were finally facing the future together. When BC arrived at the abandoned warehouse, she was greeted by a sight she could never have imagined. The walls were covered with photographs from every stage of her life. Her first birthday, her first day of school, her graduation, even the day she became an engineer. Each photograph had been taken from a distance. Each one represented years of silent protection. Mr. Falade apologized for frightening her and explained that he had only been fulfilling the promise he made to her late mother. As BC struggled to process
everything she had learned. A sudden explosion echoed outside the warehouse. The building shook violently. Dust filled the air. The lights instantly went out. Everyone froze in complete darkness, not knowing that the greatest danger was still waiting ahead.
Everything changed. Without warning, a powerful explosion erupted outside the building. The entire warehouse shook violently. Concrete cracked, glass shattered. Thick dust quickly filled the air, making it almost impossible to see. Kunle immediately called out for Bisi, desperately trying to find her through the smoke. From somewhere inside the warehouse, Bisi answered, letting him know she was safe. Relieved, Kunle rushed toward her and quickly helped her back to her feet. Although shaken by the explosion, Bisi assured him that she wasn't hurt. Just then, Mr. Falade carefully looked towards the damaged warehouse entrance. His expression suddenly became serious. Someone was still outside. Before anyone could react, another loud bang echoed through the night. The three of them froze where they stood, realizing that the danger was far from over.
Within minutes, the sound of police sirens filled the night. Officers quickly surrounded the warehouse while another team chased a suspicious vehicle speeding away from the scene. Bisi, Kunle, and Mr. Falade were safely escorted outside. As investigators searched the area, they discovered a brown evidence envelope. Inside were anonymous letters, the threatening photographs, and the very phone used to send every mysterious message. At last, the investigation had taken a major step forward.
Back at the police station, investigators carefully examined the recovered phone. The digital evidence led them to one final name. The lead detective slowly placed a photograph on the table. It belonged to Barrister Gabriel Ajayi, a respected lawyer who had handled legal matters connected to Bisi's late father's estate. Bisi could hardly believe what she was seeing. The man she had trusted professionally had secretly been connected to the mystery all along. A few weeks later, the courtroom was filled with anticipation. Bisi confidently shared everything she had learned. The recovered documents, the anonymous messages, the surveillance evidence, and Mr. Falade's testimony all confirmed the truth. After carefully reviewing every detail, the judge delivered the final verdict. Barrister Gabriel was found guilty. The stolen family property was legally returned to Bisi. Justice, though delayed, had finally prevailed. As life slowly returned to normal, healing quietly began inside the Adekoya family. One evening, Madame Ronke prepared dinner as she had done countless times before. But this time, instead of criticizing Bisi,
She invited her to taste the soup and asked for her opinion. It was a simple moment, yet it carried years of unspoken forgiveness. Mother and daughter smiled together. Their relationship was finally becoming what it had always deserved to be.
A few days later, Bisi and Madame Ronke visited Morayo's resting place. Standing before the grave, Bisi gently placed fresh flowers beside the headstone. She turned toward the woman who had raised her. With tears in her eyes, she quietly thanked Ronke for keeping the promise she made so many years ago. They embraced beneath the setting sun. In that peaceful moment, love proved itself stronger than blood.
As the days passed, Kunle invited Bisi to the very bridge she had designed. Looking across the beautiful city skyline, he reminded her that she had spent her career building bridges that connected people. Then, with a smile, he knelt down on one knee. Holding out a ring, he asked Bisi to spend the rest of her life with him. Overwhelmed with joy, Bisi laughed through her tears before happily accepting. The people nearby applauded, celebrating the beginning of a beautiful new chapter.
Several months later, wedding bells echoed through a beautifully decorated church. Family and friends gathered to witness a day filled with love and hope. Before Bisi walked down the aisle, Madame Ronke gently adjusted her veil one final time. No words were needed. Their smiles said everything. As Bisi reached the altar, Kunle looked at her with admiration. Their journey had been filled with pain, but it had led them to this unforgettable moment. 1 year later, the family gathered once again. This time, not because of secrets or fear, but because of love. Children filled the garden with laughter. Kunle happily prepared the food. Bisi served drinks with a smile. Madame Ronke laughed freely beside her day. Mr. Falade arrived openly through the front gate. No longer hiding in the shadows. No longer carrying the burden of silence. At last, they had truly become one family.
As the afternoon drew to a close, Bisi stood and raised her glass. She looked around the table at the people who had shaped her journey. Then she shared the lesson life had taught her. Family is not defined only by blood. It is built by those who choose to stay, who choose to protect, who choose to forgive, and who choose to love, even when life becomes difficult. Everyone raised their glasses together. Laughter filled the garden as the camera slowly pulled away. And with that, one family's painful story ended, not with loss, but with healing, hope, and a future built on truth and love. The end.